You open a message from someone you met months ago. It is long and thoughtful. The structure is clean, the tone calibrated, not too warm, not too formal. There is even a small concession in the third paragraph, just enough to make it feel honest. 3 years ago, you might have thought, this person is unusually articulate. Now you think something else entirely. And the uncomfortable part is not that you suspect AI. The uncomfortable part is this. Even if you knew they wrote every word themselves, the message still would not prove what it used to prove. Before going further, when I say smart in this video, I do not mean truly wise, accurate or experienced. I mean what intelligence looks like on the surface. Structure, fluency, confidence, emotional calibration, the ability to sound like you know what you're doing. That surface is now widely accessible, and that changes something important. We are producing more intelligent sounding language than at any point in history. The tools are real, and the outputs are often genuinely useful. Drafts that would have taken hours now take minutes. Strategy documents, proposals, emails that sound like they came from someone with 20 years of experience. And yet something has quietly become harder. Not producing answers, evaluating them. The standard response is, learn to detect AI content. Verify your sources. Think critically. That is not wrong, but it treats this as a detection problem. And the deeper issue begins after detection. So the easy explanation is, maybe the problem is just whether something was written by a human or by AI. But that explanation stops too early. Even when you know something was written with AI assistance, you still have to evaluate it. You still have to decide whether the idea behind the words is any good. And that decision is harder than it looks, because polished language no longer tells you what it used to tell you. Smart used to be expensive to perform. That cost was not just inconvenient, it was functional. It made the signal partially reliable. A well-written memo, a carefully argued proposal, an email that demonstrated real thought. These things took time and background knowledge to produce. This meant that effort was embedded in the output. Now that cost has dropped dramatically. And when the cost of producing a signal falls, the signal stops functioning as evidence of what it used to indicate. Think of it like a currency after inflation. The bills still look official, but they no longer carry the same weight. Smart-sounding language has not disappeared. It has just become cheap to print. The first acceptable version. Here is where the gap becomes personal. You're working on something, a pitch, a report, a piece of writing, or a plan. You ask an AI tool for help. Within a few minutes you have something back. You read it and think, this could work. You might even think, oh wow. And then you do something that happens more often than most people admit. You send it. You publish it. Because the version in front of you crossed the threshold of acceptance, and acceptance was enough to stop. That is the first acceptable version trap. The moment the first usable version starts to feel like the finished one. The dangerous version of this is not the obviously bad output. A bad output is usually easy to reject. The dangerous version is the one that clears the bar. It sounds competent. It uses the right vocabulary, or at least you think it does. It is organized. It does not embarrass you right away, and so it stops the thinking that would have produced something better. This is the core problem that most conversations about AI quality miss. The issue is not that AI produces bad ideas. It is that AI can dress a weak idea in the clothes of a finished one. The only thing missing might be the thing that matters most, genuine thought. And the structure makes it very hard to see that something is missing. Two consultants pitch on the same project. Both proposals are well written, same structure, similar language, similar confidence. One of them has spent 3 years in the industry, made expensive mistakes, and changed how they work because of them. The other assembled a strong-looking document using a template and a good prompt. The proposals look nearly identical, but one is compressed experience, the other is competent packaging. The problem is that on the page you cannot easily tell which is which. The question is, how do you tell the difference? And the answer cannot be by the writing alone. Good enough. becomes dangerous when it arrives before judgment has caught up. There is a name for what is actually shifting here. Not a media literacy gap, not a prompt engineering problem. A judgment gap. This is the judgment gap. The distance between what people can now generate and what they can actually judge. Outputs become smoother faster because people become better at evaluating, revising, rejecting, contextualizing, and finishing them. The gap grows not because thinking necessarily gets worse, but because the surface gets smoother. Judgment here means more than just evaluate this output. It means knowing what to accept, what to reject, what needs to be deeper, what is actually finished, and what questions should have been asked first. That is much more than what most people mean when they say critical thinking. AI becomes a thinking amplifier when the person using it brings something to the process. A real question, clear criteria, the ability to recognize when something is not yet right, and the willingness to revise rather than accept. Without those conditions, AI becomes something else, a way to avoid the uncertainty that would have built judgment. The difference is not in the tool, it is in what the person is doing while the tool runs. The judgment gap would be managed if it were only a false fact problem. But smooth-sounding language misleads in three distinct ways, each more subtle than the last. The most visible failure, the confident, fluent statement that happens to be wrong. Not obviously wrong, plausibly wrong. Formatted like a fact, delivered without hesitation, consistent with the surrounding text. You ask an AI chatbot for background on a company before a meeting. 6 bullet points come up. 5 are accurate. 1, a specific market share figure, is plausible but fabricated. You use it in the meeting. The problem was not only the error. The problem was that the 5 accurate points gave you confidence in the 6th. Wrong facts are the easiest to guard against, because they are at least detectable in principle. The second mode is less visible. Most AI systems are designed to be helpful. In practice, that often means they continue inside the frame you give them. If you bring a weak assumption into a conversation, the system often builds on it rather than questioning it. The output shapes itself to your framing, and because it is fluent and organized, the framing can feel more solid than it actually is. That is why better prompts do not always solve the deeper problem. Better prompting can improve the output. It cannot automatically improve the evaluation of the output. Opinion confirms, judgment challenges. The third mode is the subtlest. A warmer, more personable system can feel more trustworthy. That feeling is real. The question is what it costs. Comfort and accuracy are not the same thing. A voice that makes you feel understood is not the same as a voice that tells you what you need to hear. Wrong feelings do not look like a failure. They feel like being understood. Wrong facts can be checked. Wrong frames can be caught if you know the look. Wrong feelings rarely get examined at all. What judgment actually requires. Before the reframe, something worth saying clearly. This is not an argument for trusting human judgment more and AI less. Human judgment fails in well-documented ways. Confirmation bias, overconfidence, pattern recognition that finds pattern in noise, the tendency to interpret what is comfortable rather than what is accurate. Intuition is not reliable because it feels certain. It becomes reliable when a person has had enough exposure to clear feedback in a structured domain to calibrate it. Where those conditions do not exist, confident judgment is often just confident guessing. So the answer to the judgment gap is not use AI less and trust yourself more. The answer is harder. It is understand precisely what judgment is and what it takes to build it. There is a distinction worth naming precisely because it collapses in everyday use. An opinion response. It says, "This sounds right, I agree," or "This feels off." Opinion is fast, reactive, and perfectly adequate for many decisions. It is not a failure mode, it is a tool, one that works best in familiar territory. Judgment evaluates differently. It asks, what are the criteria here? What is this built on? What does it leave out? What would it cost if this were wrong? What is the alternative it is not showing me? Opinion says, this sounds smart. Judgment asks, what would make this wrong? Judgment does not only ask whether something sounds right, it asks where it would break. AI can generate reactions at scale, fast, fluent, and calibrated to the frame you gave it. What it cannot produce is trained judgment. Because judgment is not a product of processing information, it is a product of making decisions, observing consequences, and calibrating over time. There is one more piece of this that tends to get overlooked. The quality of your AI output is constrained by the distinctions you can make. If the only feedback you give it is, make it better, you're working with a very blunt instrument. If you can distinguish between precise and generic, between observational and normative, between honest and therapeutic, between clean and oversimplified, you can steer the work at a completely different level of precision. Make it better is not a judgment, it is a request. Judgment begins when you can say what better means. But don't mistake this for a prompting tip. There's a deeper point. The vocabulary you have for quality determines what you're capable of noticing. And what you cannot notice, you cannot evaluate. Here are two diagnostic questions the whole video has been building towards. Did this help me think, or did this help me skip the uncomfortable part of thinking? Not because using AI to move faster is wrong, but because the uncomfortable part of thinking, the part where you are genuinely uncertain, where the frame is not yet clear, where you have to decide what matters, is exactly the part that builds judgment. Skip it often enough, and the judgment does not develop. Ask yourself, did this get better, or did it only become more acceptable? Did the idea get better, or did the language just become easier to approve? Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters. So what actually changes when you take this seriously? The question is no longer, how do I get better outputs? The better question is, do I know what good means here? Not creativity as a vague virtue, not intelligence as an abstract capacity. Something more specific. The trained ability to notice what is missing, to recognize when an assumption is load-bearing, to say no to something polished because you can articulate exactly why it is wrong. In an information-rich environment, the scarcity is not information, it is attention. In a language-rich environment, the scarcity is not language, it is the judgment that can determine what language is worth trusting. And judgment cannot be generated on demand. It is built through decisions with real consequences, through the friction of being wrong and knowing why, through the discipline of maintaining criteria when a smooth answer is trying to lower your standards. So, the message you opened, maybe it was written by the person who sent it. Maybe it was not. Maybe it was both. Their thinking, shaped by a system that gave it a surface it might not have had otherwise. The question is not whether AI touched the message. The question is whether the message still proves what it appears to prove. Because in a world where anyone can produce language that sounds considered, careful, and intelligent, the actual scarcity is not the language. It is the capacity to look past the surface, to hold it against criteria that do not change just because the wording got better, to ask not only what it says, but what it costs to be wrong about it. And the problem does not end with first drafts. AI does not only make first drafts cheap, it makes revision feel infinite. Which means finishing, actually deciding something is done, becomes its own act of judgment. AI can give you answers. Judgment decides what an answer is worth.